Hello everybody, my name's Johnny Bolton, and my presentation today is all about creativity, specifically identifying creative students and teaching for creative growth. So kind of a two-part um, presentation on creativity. So before we start, I want you can pause the video or whatever you need to do here, but this will be our first discussion question. I want you to just take a minute and think, how do you think about creativity? Should it fit into identifying gifted students? Should it even be a part of giftedness at all? And then, is it something that's measurable? Is it something that's tangible? I think that's a good place to start before we go on with our presentation. So go ahead and pause if you need to. So first of all, let's talk about how do we identify creativity? What is creativity in a student, and whose role is it to identify those students? So as I was reading in chapter 24, there's a list of positive creative traits, and I picked out most of the ones that I thought stood out to me the most. And sometimes with creativity, it's such an abstract that um, it's like we know what it is, but it's hard to put it into words. So picking out these traits is a good way to do that. Um, so first, I picked originality. So most of the time, this kid, and it could be an adult, but I'm going to talk about identifying gifted students more. Um, Somebody that's original has original thoughts. Um, Oftentimes, it's a student that's independent, is willing to do things on their own. Maybe you see them playing on the playground by themselves because they're able to play with that, imaginary friend. Um, a lot of times they're aware of their own creativity. They like things like art. They know that they have a creative ability and a mind that gets outside of the box. Typically, creative students are motivated. They're curious, right? I feel like that one seems to be an obvious trait when I think about creativity. They want it. It's the why kid. Why does this exist? Why does this happen like this? Um, Oftentimes, just like giftedness, they have a good sense of humor. I mentioned artistic abilities, um, open-minded, willing to explore, exploratory students. And then I thought this one was interesting that creative students often need time alone, and I think that's to fulfill those other positive traits. Um, and then some negative traits to kind of look at with students who exhibit creativity. So typically, they can be overactive, both physically and mentally. It's kind of like their brain has a hard time shutting off. Um, they can be temperamental and emotional. I would, attribute this to oftentimes creative students. Um, they kind of, I don't want to say they live in their own world, but they're in that creative realm, so things can bother them very quickly if it kind of goes against their thought process, which leads to questioning rules and authority. Which kind of leads back to that why, but if you take that why and put it into a negative aspect, I would say that's definitely one of them. Rebellious kind of goes along, stubborn kind of goes along. Sometimes can be absent-minded, and I think that also goes back into being in their own world, which I visit a lot as I read this. Argumentative, and then oftentimes sloppy or disorganized. And something sloppy or disorganized to them or to the average person, what you may view, is actually organized to them in their own creative way. And so maybe a student whose room is super messy, but you can say they can tell you exactly where the remote to the TV is, because that's how their mind constructs things creatively. There's a couple of ways to identify these students. There is informal identification and formal identification. Informal, how I would think of it, is just observations, right? And this can be anybody. This can be parents. This can be teachers. This can be other teachers in the school. This can be peers. Oftentimes, will be able to pick out a creative person. And what I found interesting is even the student themselves oftentimes knows they're creative. I don't want to just limit creativity to artsiness, right? But typically, we think of creative students as able to do some kind of art, music, art. Um, I even think of building, like building blocks. They're able to create um, from nowhere. Just a highly active imagination. But informal identification is going to be these people seeing that they're creative and saying, "Oh, we have somebody creative on our hands." It's very subjective. There's no background besides, "Oh, I know what creativity is. This student's creative." So it's important to have a form of formal identification. And through my readings, there are several different assessments that can be used. Now, I personally struggle, and I put this on there. I personally struggle with assessments with creativity because I feel like no matter what, there's going to be some kind of subjectivity to them. Personally, that's how I think. So that's what I put. It is a difficult construct. It's a complex thing, right? If an alien dropped down and said define creativity, it's kind of a hard thing to explain. So these assessments that I'm going to go over have are different tools that we can use to identify creativity in students. So the first one being Torrance's Things Done on Your Own. This one's interesting. It's basically just a 100-item checklist where students go down and say, yes, I've done this activity. No, I've not done this activity. And if they have more, I guess they're more creative. The second one, the Detroit Public Schools Creativity Scales. This one's interesting as well. You take student samples, and as a teacher, you can create a set student sample like a writing or a drawing or whatever it may be, and you rate their creativeness kind of against each other. Another way to assess creativity is creating your own checklist using multiple different formal identifications and creating your own assessment technique. That's something that's been done as well. I personally don't necessarily love all these, but I wanted to present them to you. These two tend to be more popular. So the How Do You Think test, it evaluates those positive traits we discussed earlier. It sees if students exhibit all those positive traits. And probably the most popular and most talked about that I've come across so far in the world of gifted education is the Torrance test of creative thinking. So I've seen a copy of this, and it is abstract. It gives students a multitude of different ways to kind of express how they see something. For example, it may be a squiggly line, maybe like the green one at the top of that you see at the top of this slide, and they have to create something out of it. Create and creativity always, that's the base root of the word creativity. So it may be draw something using this line, or here's a circle. How do you make it different? So next, teaching creativity. So kind of switching gears from identifying creative students to teaching creative students. So the first thing I like to ask is, and the thing this stood out to me in the reading, is creativity taught or is somebody born with it, right? There's a fundamental theory there. And the book said the answer is yes. It can be both, which I think is very interesting. So these are the 5 ways to train creativity, and I'm going to break them each down here. So fostering creative conscience. So in a classroom environment, things to do is maintain a psychologically safe classroom environment. So make sure students feel safe answering things, doing things, just comfortable. A basic need of feeling safe in what they're doing. As a teacher, recognizing and rewarding creativity. So, but you're going to see a theme throughout is making students aware that what they're doing is creative so they can keep building on that. Accepting students as they are, And then helping resist pressure to conform. Oftentimes, being different, it's hard to be different. So, helping students say it's okay to have an imaginary friend, right? And then encourage questions and risk taking. It's okay to be wrong, right? Always, hey, answer this. I don't care if you're wrong. Let's talk about it, see what you're thinking. Another way is improving students' understanding of creativity. So basically just defining it for students. So modify existing, like have students modify existing ideas. Hey, a bicycle works like this. Could you make it work in a different way? Instruct on personality traits that contribute to creative imagination. Tell them, why hold back the trait? Tell students exactly what goes into creativity. Divergent thinking tests, right? So give different options on test taking skills. And then, like I've said before, help students define creativity. Another way to teach creativity, is exercising creative ability. All right, so just practice. I mean, have students practice. Be conscious about teaching this. It's just like any physical or intellectual ability. You're not gonna bench press 135 pounds if you don't bench press the bar first. And practice to get to that point. Same thing with creativity. Ask open-ended questions. Ask, how can this be improved? Right? How can your history exercise, how could, back to Sputnik, how could the United States have done better in competing against Sputnik? As we started with Sputnik in this class. And then just words, have students analyze, synthesize, provide logical reasoning for critical thinking, think ahead for the future. These are all exercises that we can do to help students grow and maintain creative abilities, which I believe lessens with age. So teaching creative thinking techniques, just like anything, you got to teach it, right? It doesn't always come on its own. So deliberate analogical thinking. Analogies are big for creativity. How does this connect with this? Brainstorming, have students work in groups and come up with ideas. Have them work on their own and just come up with ideas for their paper, not limiting themselves to one idea. And then list out important attributes that the student thinks of creativeness, or attributes in their whatever they're working on. List important things that they think leads to creative abilities. And then involving students in creative activities, right? So things that honestly, as an educator, kind of learned throughout school without knowing it influence creativity. Grouping, allow for choice. Art centers, drawing, hands-on activities, creative writing, anything to stimulate. Choice is the big word here for me. Giving different options, opportunities to students. As a high school teacher, I think of what pathways are we giving students to advance into careers? How's their creativity taking them into nursing? How's it Sorry, little technical glitch. My recording app crashed. So what I was saying is, like, as a high school teacher, I think of what classes we're providing to where students can choose pathways into nursing, into being a plumber. Are we giving them the option of robotics so they can explore that side of things? Do we have different science classes they can take? That's how I think of providing choices, but that's on a broad spectrum. So it can be in a broad spectrum or in just the classroom. Do you have two options for students to choose on an activity? Do you give them a choice when doing a project? If you're an English teacher, do you give them a choice of what book to read for a book project? Different things we can do to involve students in creative activities. So, in conclusion, and these are mostly conclusions I've drawn through the reading, and how I think about things, is creativity is a complex subject. It's not easy to define. If an alien dropped down on Earth right now and said, "What's creativity?" It may be hard to put into words exactly what it is. So hopefully this helped a little bit. Is creativity innate? So are you born with it? Or is it only taught or nurtured? Is it neither? I would think yes, it's both. some people are just naturally more creative than others, but it can also be something that's taught or nurtured, just like I compare it to lifting weights um, earlier. So um, I believe I'm a little off by it closing on me. So hopefully that got in there. If it didn't, I compared it to lifting weights. You don't just get there right away. So it can be assessed informally, so through observations, or formally. I hope you learned. Um, you can teach students what it is. It's important to explain to students what creativity is so that they can try to become more creative. Teach them how to explore it. Teach them how to go outside and play on their own. That kind of thing. And then hopefully you learn classroom activities that should be designed to grow creativity. And you might have already been doing those on your own already. I know a lot of those that I saw were heavily, even just in the physical education world, a lot of those were heavily taught in school for me going into teaching. So hopefully you enjoyed this presentation. I have a few discussion questions posted for you to talk about and kind of look through. The first one being what we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, kind of your idea on creativity. So have a good one.